Good afternoon and welcome to our inaugural STEM Education and Workforce Equity Forum. First of all, I'd like to give a big thank you to all of the great organizations and people joining us today to discuss how we can be a part of our partnership to develop more equitable solutions to help our underserved and underrepresented students see the value of a STEM education, for them to have the opportunity to be educated in STEM, and most importantly, believe they can be successful in STEM. In fact, as many of you already know, STEM Generation exclusively serves public school children with a 50% or greater participation in the National School Lunch Program. Additionally, this population has been disproportionately impacted by COVID-19. As a Colorado native, I was stunned to hear that 41% of Colorado public school children qualify for the National Lunch Program. Translating that into numbers, that's 371,000 students. Also, these children will have 6,000 fewer hours of learning than their peers by the time they reach sixth grade. As I said before, I was stunned by these numbers, and I'm so proud of those of you here today who'll be working so hard to help our children succeed in STEM, and actually in other fields as well, despite these significant challenges. Moreover, corporations, we can't rely on what made us successful in the past. Our panelists today will not only talk about our ethical responsibility to help our underserved student population, or how diversity and inclusion drives better solutions, but also drive the fact that given our changing demographics, we're not going to be successful if we don't help our children learn to love and eventually believe they can be successful in STEM. A common theme you'll hear today from us and from our panelists is that we have to solve the core problems and not just focus on short-term Band-Aid solutions that eventually fall off. The sustainable solutions are what we're looking for. Now I want to give you a quick overview of our agenda today. First, the founder and executive director of STEM Generation, Dr. Wendy Wimpy, will give a quick overview of the event, which will be followed by a short introduction by our moderator, Avis Rivers, the CEO of Technology Concepts Group International. At approximately 4:10, we'll kick off our panel discussion until 5 p.m., where we'll have an audience Q&A with the panel. We'll wrap up the formal part of the event at 5:10, and then have breakout rooms with our panelists, Wendy and me as well. Today's event, but not our passion, will end at 6 p.m. today. I'm honored to introduce our visionary leader, Dr. Wendy Wimpy. Wendy is a Stanford-trained scientist, former professor, and most importantly, a mother. All three of these dynamics led her to ask this question: why can't we apply the scientific approach to equip our underserved and underrepresented communities with the STEM skills they need to tap into those economic opportunities that are all around them? Wendy, I'm passing the baton on to you.
All right, thank you, Bill, and thank you for leading this eye-opening event and for all of your support of STEM Generation. I'm so grateful to have you standing right beside us as we grow up to grow our impact outside of Colorado. And I'm the founder and executive director of STEM Generation. So thank you all for joining us here today to be part of the equity solution. A special thank you to those of you who donated to STEM Generation's programming, to our community leaders, the Carter Family Foundation and HWS and Associates, and to all of you who are here as part of one of the 12 strong equity teams. I'm absolutely thrilled to give Bill, Avis, and plus our 3 other equity leaders a platform to share with you their invaluable expertise today. I'm honored to be standing here among you all. So our goal today is to empower you with practical tips for being part of the equity solution. All of you in our audience comes from a diverse backgrounds, as diverse as the equity leaders today. Most of you are business leaders, STEM professionals, or educators. All of you are in a position of significant influence. All of you can actively be part of the equity solution. And all of you are invited to join STEM Generation and make your impact together with us. STEM Generation is a young, nimble, and growing nonprofit that improves access to high quality early STEM learning opportunities. We only serve educators and children from high needs, low resource schools. These schools and children have been disproportionately impacted by COVID-19, as Bill had mentioned, and also by the unprecedented budget cuts. We tackle inequities in STEM learning opportunities that fall squarely along socioeconomic lines. STEM Generations programming is very strategically built around the mission to address these inequities head on. STEM Generations whole team has had all hands on deck for the last couple of months to deliver this eye-opening event to you today. Our equity leaders will connect the dots between the lack of diversity in the STEM workforce and the core of the problem. That's inequities in early STEM learning opportunities that fall squarely along socioeconomic lines. And that is the cornerstone of STEM Generation. Each of you will walk away with practical tips for making your impact starting today. After the equity leaders discussion, before we move into small group discussion, I will share with you some of the ways in which you can become involved with STEM Generation, whether individually or as a team through your company. So now I'd like to pass the baton back to you, Bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Wendy. We're very fortunate to have Avis Yates Rivers as our moderator today. As I mentioned earlier, she's currently the president and CEO of Technology Concepts Group International. She has 35 years of management experience in the information technology industry and has been a tech entrepreneur for over 30 years. She has many accolades, and if I went through all of them, we'd be here all day. So based on time, I'm not going to mention all of them, but wanted to highlight a few. Avis was selected as the Entrepreneur of the Year, Women of Distinction, and was awarded the White House Champion of Change in STEM by President Barack Obama. Avis, I'll turn the floor over to you.
Thank you, Bill. What a delight to be here with you all this evening. I am excited and I am so proud to know my new hero, Wendy Wempe, and all of the work that you're doing to close some of that opportunity gap for our children. Who unfortunately are missing out on the full potential of life, right? And if we start young, as you know, then we're able to close those gaps for these children. And so as our panelists are assembling, I just want to let you know that there will be 2 polls this evening, and we ask that you fully participate in the poll, knowing that your responses will be completely anonymous. So we're going to have Illyria introduce the first poll now as I ask my panelists to begin to assemble. All right. So with that done, I'd like to introduce our panelists for this evening. And these are some very brief introductions, because like Bill, I could be here all night talking about these 3 leaders. They are amazingly accomplished professionals who you can read more about on social media. I want to start with Geeta Verma. She is a professor of science education at the University of Colorado, Denver. Her research interests focus on inequity issues in science education, and she strives to create imaginative and innovative science, technology, engineering, and math learning environments. Geeta serves as the co-editor-in-chief for the Journal of Science Teacher Education, Science Teaching. She is also serving as the co-principal investigator for a National Science Foundation grant. Please welcome Geeta to the panel this evening. Secondly, I'm pleased to introduce Karen Liu. Karen is the co-founder of Strata, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Consultancy, offering fractional Chief Inclusion Officer services. She offers trainings and DEI planning programs. She is the founding member of Elevate Change, a coalition of 30+ forward-thinking Colorado-based companies dedicated to cultivating inclusive workplaces. Karen has worked in tech for over 15 years. She's worked across startups, large enterprises, nonprofits, and government. She is passionate about building both inclusive products and inclusive teams. And thirdly, let's welcome Jamie Casap. Jamie served as the Chief Education Evangelist at Google for more than 14 years and was the second member of the Google for Education team. In that time, Jamie launched Google's G Suite, those tools into higher education and K-12. He also launched Chromebooks into education and was the creator of the Google for Education Transformation Framework. That's a holistic approach to education transformation. Today, Jamie is partnering and collaborating with higher education institutions, school systems, and businesses around the world. He's helping them to build transformational policies and practices to elevate inclusion into their policies and practices. He speaks on education, digitalization, diversity and inclusion, Generation Z, and the future of work. So please give me a virtual round of applause for our three amazing panelists this evening. Thank you very much for being on mute while you do that. So our intent this evening is to kind of set the stage and create awareness around this problem of inequities in education for our young people. We want to create this awareness and then also give you some tools, as Wendy said, to take back with you and leverage these practical ways that you as individuals and organizations can make a difference. You know, there is tremendous potential for organizations that invest in fostering a culture where girls, women, and people of color and other underrepresented groups participate with strong voices. The idea you don't have is the voice you haven't heard. And inclusion changes what's possible. These are confident expressions of what we know is true. Diversity and inclusion enhances outcomes in technological innovation for educational institutions and businesses of all size. I've been privileged to work as a board member and national spokesperson for the National Center for Women in Information Technology, NCWIT, out there in Colorado as well. They're headquartered in Boulder. And with the 15 years of research around this issue, we know a lot about what is true and things that can help to stem the tide. However, what is also true is that too many poor children are denied access to technology through no fault of their own. Overwhelmingly, these children are Black and brown and qualify for free or reduced lunch. The system is failing these children, and the impact of that failure continues to be felt and will continue to be felt generation after generation, exacerbating and widening the wealth and opportunity gap. So now let's get into our conversation. Panelists, education, early and otherwise, let's talk about that. What should our children be learning, and when should they be learning it? What are the implications of children not having equal access to these learnings, and what can be done to change this dynamic? What is the impact that policy and legislation can have on this conversation? And Gita, I'm going to ask you to start with that series of questions and give us your insights on that.
Sure. Thank you for the lovely introduction, Avis, and thank you for having me here. So I want to touch upon briefly regarding the policy, that the role of policy in the experiences that we create for our students. And I'm a professor of science education, so I'm specifically going to talk about the science of the STEM, STEM. And just FYI, in our field, we still are kind of wrapping our minds around this idea about STEM versus these individual disciplines. And in terms of science in the elementary and early childhood ages, what we find is that because of the policies such as NCLB, No Child Left Behind, and followed by Every Student Succeeds Act, science actually is not taught in elementary grades for the most part. Science and social studies take a backseat because we have the policies put a focus on mathematics and language arts. So what that means is that it depends on individual teachers, it depends on individual students, schools to provide these opportunities. And if you all remember your childhood experiences, as a child, who are inquisitive, they are creative, they're collaborative, they want to explore, and science allows you to do that. And unfortunately, we don't teach science in elementary grades, at least in public schools. And as a result of that, what happens is that when students come to middle school and they experience science, what most of the time, and I don't want to generalize it, but for the most part, what they experience is what we call the cookbook science, or the inform, verify practice, where you actually do labs, but they're like cookbook lab following a recipe, but you don't really don't get to inquire into big ideas, big problems, big questions. And so that has been the trend. And then what we are finding out that the students, by the time they get to middle school, they've kind of figured out what they want to do, and science is not on the top of their preference to pursue as a career and all of those things. So I'm going to stop here. So it gives you a sense of how a policy can play its role in the experience, the learning experiences of our children.
Thank you, Geeta. Does Karen, do you or Jamie want to jump in on that? The role of early education. Jamie, I know that you have spent a lot of time working in the educational field, both with Google and since leaving Google. What are your thoughts about and your insights on early education in the STEM fields?
So one of the things I always start, first of all, thanks for having me and thanks for the introduction. It's great to be here. I think one of the things that we never talk about videos because everyone's somewhere else. I'm in Sedona, Arizona. So just wanted to share where I was, just to make everyone there jealous. Every time I start a presentation, I start with this idea that education disrupts poverty, right? That education is what is the silver bullet, something that we've always talked about. Now, when I say education, everyone just assumes I mean the education system, and that's not what I mean at all. I mean education. I mean making yourself smarter, having people help you become intelligent so that you can process information, so that you can problem solve, so you can critically think, those human skills that we need to develop. And I think that policy issues have a huge impact on what we do in our schools, and it has since the beginning. I'd love us to dive even deeper into the idea of where those policies come from. And a lot of the time, those policies come from lobbyists who work for companies that do things like standardized testing, and do things like sell textbooks and do things, and those policies ironically or coincidentally are like, oh, look, the policies that we have in education align very nicely with the standardized test. What a coincidence. And so I think we need to dive deep into where policies come from. Policies should come from the people. And so part of what we need to do is in our communities, if we value education, and I believe that the pandemic is helping us put education at the center of our community, right? I have a teacher friend of mine, very good friend of mine, who she told me the other day she was in the supermarket and somebody knew she was a teacher. She had the high school she worked at, and somebody leaned over and said, "Thank you for your service." Like we're treating teachers like the military now, right? Because people are recognizing through the pandemic, the importance of a teacher and the role that the teacher plays and how hard it is to be a teacher. And so I hope that one of the positive outcomes from the pandemic is that we value the education systems that we have in our community as critical to everything else that we do. And so when we talk about early education, we're talking about, from birth. And I have a 6-year-old. I have other older kids, but we don't care about them anymore. I have a 6-year-old, and when I think about early education, I think about her and I think about what I want her to know. And what I want her to be able to do is have human skills. And by human skills, I mean problem solving, critical thinking, collaboration, the ability to learn, creativity, those things, and this inside the subjects that we want our students to learn about. So what does collaboration look like in a science? What does collaboration what does problem solving look like in a history assignment, or whatever subject? To me, the subjects don't matter, although they should. My point is that the human skills are the things that I want to focus on, because whether we like it or not, we are now entering a digitalized age, and we are at the very, 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 very beginning of this. And I'll just give you an example just to set the stage of where the future of work is, or where the future of careers, right? Because I think that word's going to go away pretty soon. And just as an example, Google had a breakthrough right before I left in quantum computing. And the breakthrough that they had was, if you took one of those mathematical equations that spins forever and you fed it to the world's most powerful supercomputer, it would take that supercomputer 10,000 years to process that equation. The breakthrough that Google had in quantum computing, and I'm not going to get into defining it, but the breakthrough was that they did it in 300 seconds. So 10,000 years versus 300 seconds, right? What's in between those two numbers? So we are at the very beginning of this. And so understanding science, understanding technology, engineering, mathematics, those things they're no longer an option, or you should choose a STEM field. That's all that it is. That's all that will be, is those ideas inside whatever, on farms, making clothes, whatever it is that you're going to do, those things are going to be components of that. So it's important to understand those things up front. At the same time, helping our students build those human skills that they're going to need to solve those problems and critically think and take advantage of all that digitalized age stuff that's coming our way.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jamie. And I love your passion. I just really appreciate it.
I'm just a loud Latino from New York. That's all. There's no passion. It's just, this is how we are all the time.
Well, you know, Karen, I love your idea of fractional diversity, equity, and inclusion officers. I think every company needs to have a focus, and if they cannot afford or are not large enough to have a full-time one, they certainly need to consider having a fractional one.
Absolutely.
How is this inequity in early STEM education impacting the workplace culture right now?
Well, thanks, Avis. And also thanks so much for having me. I'm already learning so much from Geeta and Jamie. You know, I'm very much coming at this conversation from the perspective that companies have a huge responsibility in all of this. The idea of helping underserved and underrepresented kids believe that they can succeed and have access to role models and to understand the possibilities there, that's super important. You know, I speak with kids sometimes and I tell them the roles you're going to have in tech, if that's where you want to work, they don't exist yet. You get to make those up. You get to invent them. So having access to people who look like them, who are successful, and understanding that the possibilities are limitless, where they can invent those roles, that's really important. But as those young people turn into interns and employees, and as I understand, the vast majority of folks in the audience today here are HR and people ops folks, CSR folks. So as corporate leaders, you know, what is your company doing to welcome these people in and create an inclusive and equitable environment for them? You know, if you're only thinking about diversity, that's a pretty shallow way. People without true inclusion, folks tend to leave a company in under a year. I'm very much passionately with the belief that companies have a huge outsized responsibility to be on the right side of history and to do their part to reach out to communities and schools, to support and participate and be those role models. And then once these young people come into your companies, don't just focus on, you know, revisit everything from your recruiting to your bathrooms, right? Really focus on the equity and inclusion piece so that all of the ideas are heard. I love the quote, the idea you don't have is the voice you haven't heard. If someone brilliant is in the room and they never speak up, does it even matter that they're there, right?
Absolutely, Karen. And that helps to really define the difference, right, between diversity, equity, and inclusion. I think gone are the days that I long for or strive for or talk about equality, right? That's so decades ago, so passé, women's equality, Black rights equality. Today, the focus has to be on equity, right? And equity, the way that looks is that if everybody is trying to achieve the same goal, let's say look over a fence, well, some people, equality means everybody gets the same thing, whether or not it helps them look over the fence or not. If it's a box to stand on, everybody gets the same height box. And that is not equity. It's not equitable, because they're not reaching the goal at the same time. And unfortunately, the reality is that the tall guy who doesn't need any box to stand on are the ones who are getting the most help, the most access, the most opportunities. And so our society is so inequitable as we see it over and over and over again. And so, yeah, that is so true. And I wish I could take credit for the idea you don't have is the voice you haven't heard, but I can't. That's actually NC WIT's new messaging campaign, because it's so important as leaders, as you're talking, Karen, to the corporate leaders and the educational leaders in the room, that we have to engage the quiet voices. We have to continue to create cultures that's welcoming to everybody, or else folks will indeed leave. So I want to turn our attention to cultivating 21st century skills, right? Is it just for jobs, or is it a much bigger picture than that? Geeta, I'm going to come back to you on this one, because you are a professor. You are educating our young people. What are you preparing them for? What's the objective of your education pursuits?
Yeah, I'd love to comment on that, but if I may, I want to talk about something that Karen and Jamie touched upon in the previous.
Right in there. Mm-hmm.
So what Karen talks about, having this tokenization in workplaces, I have multiple students that have done work with women in STEM. One of them is on this call. And what we have found out that these tokenization efforts really backfire. And we have to go dig deeper. We have to think about what Karen used in the previous conversations about these normative ideas and things like that. So I want to kind of reinforce that any superficial efforts on our part, not only they do not pay off, they actually backfire. And research and again. And coming back to Jamie's idea about education is the kind of the doorway coming out of the poverty. And I want to kind of go a little bit, push us to think a little bit deeper about poverty and this idea about that there are different kinds of poverty. There's generational poverty. There's situational poverty. Think about people who've lost their jobs. Hopefully they'll get a job back and they'll be able to continue living the life. There is transitional poverty. And what I have learned in my work is that when you work with students who are coming from quote unquote low socioeconomic background, it's not the same, because some students have what you call middle class capital. And when I say middle class capital, what I mean is certain ways of engaging with formal and informal ways of learning that allow students to be successful. And so I wanted to kind of put it out there. And then coming back to this whole idea about the 21st century skills, there are different words people are using. They're calling them soft skills, power skills, marketable skills, essential life skills. And I have to say that our schools and universities are beginning to think about that. So let me give you an example. In Kentucky, there's a school district that is giving a virtual backpack of essential life skills to their students. So in addition to your content area, you get this other profile starting from elementary. So we're not talking about middle school, starting from elementary. And I looked at that and I talked to one of my colleagues who's a professor at a university there. And she said, it's the teachers who kind of make a narrative about it and doing that, right? But I completely agree with Jamie on that one, that the content, I mean, every information is on your fingertip. You can pretty much go to websites, places where you can learn these content. But then what do you do with that? How do you engage with that? How do you use the content to pose new questions? That's a skill set we have to teach our children. And what we have focused in the past, especially in the STEM content, is mostly content. We haven't gone to like this conversation about nature of science. What is science and how science was practiced by the scientists? So are we preparing students to be scientists? Are we preparing students to be scientifically literate? Those are two different pathways. And so we have to be thinking about that, because think now it's so contemporary right now, the COVID-19 vaccine situation. I feel like, and I say this, I feel like we failed our students because we didn't prepare them to make sense of scientific information in a way that would help them in their real life. We taught them physics, we taught them chemistry, we taught them all kinds of content, but maybe we didn't push that idea about critical thinking and how do you make sense of information enough. And now we have a whole lot of confusion going on amongst the general public. So the 21st century skills, I also want to say it with a caveat. It's also considered a conversation in neoliberal, which is basically market forces acting on people's experiences, and then people have to fit within that, experience and do what the market forces tell, rather than living a happy, seeking a happy life. And so there's this caveat with 21st century skills, and there's this tension in universities and schools about the way we conceptualize education and the way the new technologies are asking us to conceptualize may be different. And so I think it'll be up to us at the universities and K through 12 to navigate that space, so we give the best possible opportunities to our students in STEM and otherwise.
So can I just add to that?
Jeremy, I want you and Karen to stay off of mute because we're having a conversation.
Yeah, I'm off mute. If I'm on mute, it's because my dog is
Barking.
driving me crazy. But anyway, so let's talk about this idea of 21st century skills. I hate that term. I want to get rid of it, right? We are 20 years into the 21st century, right? Like it's like saying like you're in the first quarter of a basketball game and someone's saying, hey, we need a plan. I think we use the term 21st century skills because this is a subconscious mind theory. Maybe the professor can go do a research on paper on this, but this idea that we say 21st century skills because it makes us feel like that's in the future. It's all 21st century skills for the future. You don't have to worry about it right now. We're in the 21st century. So let's stop calling it 21st century skills and let's call them what I called them earlier, which are human skills. These skills about problem solving, collaboration, communicate, all these things that we've talked about, these 21st century skills. And I call them human skills. And to me, if you would ask me 6 months ago, which is the most important out of all those skills, I would have said, no, they're all important. You should master them all. Now I look back at what's happened over the last 6 months, and I would say that there is one that's more important than the others. And the professor kind of talked about this, which is the ability to learn. That is the most important skill that our students need because, and I'm not saying the ability to take a test or the ability to outline a textbook. I'm saying a self-awareness. I don't know how to do something. Where can I go learn how to do it? How do I know I'm doing it well? Right? This idea of not self-accountability, but self-awareness of what you know and what you don't know. That is absolutely critical. I hear, how many adults do you know who say, I'm not very creative. I'm not good with math. I'm not good with technology. My response to those adults, not even students, my response to the adults, this is why I don't have a lot of friends, is no, you've chosen not to be good at math. You've chosen not to be good at computing or technology, because everything, as the professor said, that you need to learn is out there waiting for you to master, to learn. And so the ability to learn, the ability to say, what is it that I need to know? How do I know it? And, I started a YouTube channel last year that everyone should go subscribe to. It's a good YouTube channel. But when I started this thing, I knew nothing about film, nothing about editing, but I didn't say, I'm not a good editor, I'm not a good YouTuber. I said, how do I learn how to be one? And I went to experts like my daughter who has a degree in film. And I said, where do I start? And she said, she laughed for 10 minutes about me starting a YouTube channel. But then she said, don't shoot in 4K, shoot in 1080, double your frame rate, keep it at 24 frames per second, keep your ISO at 100, go out, if you go outside, use an ND filter, use a variable ND filter. And I said, thank you for all that information. Here's my next question. What the hell do any of those words mean, right? And then I went and learned. And I learned, and I learned, and then I learned, and then I experienced it, and then I experimented, and I learned, and it's the cycle that you go through, but it's the self-awareness that anyone can learn anything. You can fill your brain for 16 hours a day, go to bed, and the next day start all over again. It's like it's one of those giant, those 7-Eleven gulp, what are they called? The gulpy cups, whatever.
I think it's called big.
Those endless cups that you can refill for the rest of your life with the same cup. That's your brain.
I love provoking Jamie with terms like 21st century skills because I knew what I was going to get. So you all thank me for that. Karen.
I love it. Thanks, Jamie and Geeta. Totally agree with you all. I would just add, the way I think about it, and I think we're saying sort of the same thing, is this learning disability to connect the dots, right? And use your left brain and right brain at the same time. And for example, like you can add computation to literally anything in any field and utterly transform it. And as Jamie mentioned, the future of work is rapidly changing. I'm a mom, and within my group of parenting friends, like we're all saving up for our kids, maybe not for college. Maybe college isn't a thing anymore by the time they grow up. Maybe it's to start their own business, right? I'm hoping to help raise a new generation of kids that are just more able to connect the dots, more inventive, more entrepreneurial, have their eyes open, more civically engaged. And I think, and we're seeing this now, people want to work for companies, like we said, that are on the right side of history. And if they don't find those companies, they're going to start their own. And I think that's why you're seeing a rise in B Corps and companies that are calling themselves zebra companies, who believe that profit and doing good absolutely must not be mutually exclusive. And I think that's an amazing movement to all get behind. And, look at Patagonia, what they just rolled out with their tags right on the back, vote the a-holes out. And Ben and Jerry's kind of the support they got for their stance and support of Black Lives Matter, and not just in a reactive moment, but how they always have. Like the lines are really blurred now between work and identity. And I think that's a really positive thing.
Absolutely.
So, I want to jump into this conversation about 21st century skills. And as I was listening to Jamie talk about, I had a colleague who said the same thing what Jamie said. And we just laughed, because this tells us a few things. It tells us, first of all, that it's been 20 years and we still haven't come to an agreement about what we're going to call it. It also tells me that when we coin these terms, it made sense, and then they stick. So I give you an example of ELL, English Language Learner. If I say ELL, everyone understands. It's such a problematic term because it has such a deficit perspective. So we introduce our students to emerging bilinguals or emerging multilinguals. But if I say that to other people, they won't understand probably. They'll be like, what are you talking about? But if I say ELL, we have a shared understanding, shared meaning making, right? So language has its role. But and even now, if you go for 21st century skills and you say synonyms, there'll be like 10 things that will come up. We still can't agree upon a term that, we will use for this. And also the idea whether we need to invest in inculcating these skills. So I thought I would just bring it to the group's attention about the language, because my research is about discourse analysis and using language and how do you make sense of language. So I was just chuckling when Jamie was talking about this idea about we are 20 years into 21st century and we're still talking about this term.
Well, we're going to continue that chuckling with Jamie going on a rant, because I'm going to say something else now that's going to get him started. And that is, I talk to a lot of companies, especially large enterprises, and having them become more aware of their lack of underrepresented individuals in their tech workforce. That's what NCWIT is sole mission is to increase the meaningful participation of girls, women, and people of color in technology. And we're not talking about, just soft skills job, but in the invention of technology, because when you bring in other voices, right? When you understand different experiences, and when technology is not all invented by homogenous groups like it has been over the years, you get creative new ideas and ways of doing things, right? But however, when I'm talking to some of these C-suite individuals, they complain that there is a pipeline issue. Go ahead, Jamie, go on mute while you blow off steam. They complain that there is a pipeline issue, that they have not been able to find, source, bring in enough people, other represented people, in order to fill those jobs. And by the way, there are so many net new tech jobs being created every day by US corporations that the fear is we're going to have to find some other disciplines to come in and fill these tech jobs. So what do you say about that? It's a pipeline.
saying it's a pipeline issue is like me saying I can't find steak and lobster at McDonald's, right? Like I went to 20 McDonald's and I could not find steak and lobster, right? Like it's a ridiculous argument. There is no pipeline issue. The issue is that you're not, the pipeline is the issue. The idea that you've created this world where only smart people go to Stanford and Harvard and Princeton, and then you go recruit from those schools. You're like, there are no Black people here. I don't know what happened. When I can completely, if you tell me your SAT score, I can tell you your family income, right? Like there is structural things, systematic things in place that we need to change. And so forget the pipeline, go recruit for talent, and talent can be in many different areas. And it doesn't have to be all the kids that went to Stanford that work at Google. I went to SUNY Brockport. You know how many people from SUNY Brockport work at Google? Well, now no one from SUNY Brockport works at Google, but before it was one, right? So this idea that there's a broken pipeline, it doesn't make any sense. There's talented people at state schools, at community colleges. There's talented people who don't go to college at all. One of the benefits from that, and this is maybe a bad sign for universities, is that if I have 3 companies, but if in one of my companies I started hiring people, and I won't right now because I'm a control freak, but if I started hiring people, and I don't care where you went to college. I don't care if you finished a class. I don't care where your grades were. I can assess your knowledge, skills, and abilities. And more importantly, I can assess your potential, because a resume is a history book. I could care less about your resume. I want to know what your potential is, right? I could care less what a stock did yesterday. I want to know what it's going to do tomorrow. And so this idea of how do I assess talent? How do I assess capability? How do I assess potential? I don't care where you went to school. When we figure that out, who cares where you go to school? Who cares what schools you go to? So I think it matters to think about what the pipeline issue is, because it's this created narrative that, oh, we want to hire Black people, we want to hire Latin people, but they're just not in the pipeline, right? And you get to create the pipeline, right? So that's number one. Number two is when students come up to me and say, hey, how do I get a job at Google? My response to everyone, even like 5-year-olds, is, wait, this is an HBO, so I won't curse. I'll say, forget Google, go start Google, right? Google isn't Google. Most people don't realize that Google has bought 22 companies in the last year, right? The last thing Google invented, I don't even know, right? They buy talent, they buy capability, they buy the technology, the solution. So go get 4 friends and go build that. The Latino market is $1 trillion market. The African-American market is $1 trillion market. If as a community, if we're gonna let other people build products and services for our communities, that's on us, not on them.
Yep, I know Gita wants to jump in here too, I imagine. Pipeline issue is such a myth, and I know Gita has access to research that actually dispelled the myth, but unfortunately, I live here in the Denver area, and in the Denver tech community, I hear this all the time. Oh, we're 80% white male here. What are you gonna do? It's Denver. Like, it's shocking how many times I've heard that, even in the last month or two. And if you're talking about real reasons, it's a huge recruiting issue, right? Are you, like Jamie said, looking to the same universities? Are you incentivizing your employees to make referrals and getting kind of carbon copies of them? Like, that might be a practice to revisit. Looking at your job descriptions, there are tools out there that can help you audit the language to see if it can be more inclusive, or even simply too long, right? Job descriptions that are too long cause women to self-select out. That's a fact. So there are lots of practical things you can do in the recruiting front. And then of course it doesn't end there, because once you get these folks in the door, then maybe you have an equity issue or an inclusion issue. So those are the real things to work on. And I think it's such a cop-out to say that it's a pipeline issue.
Yeah, Ms. Gita.
Yeah, so I want to give 2 sets of data to debunk this myth of pipeline. First of all, there's data out there that, and I'm talking about STEM, that 60% of the STEM people, the people who are in STEM careers, did not take a gateway course and still are in the STEM career. And that's 60%. And then pipeline and coming pretty much to the same conclusion that there's no pipeline issue. So I think the challenge we are having is because it comes back to Karen and Jamie's point is, are we looking at the right places and what are we looking for? So when so in my NSF project, I worked with elementary aged underrepresented students at a Boys and Girls Club. And we were working with technologies such as drones and, computer modeling and 3D printing, because the project is to make these kids aware of careers in STEM. And early on is better, because we know research says by the time they reach middle school, it may be too late. And what we learned was in that work was a lot of kids were learning these technologies, and then they were talking about, I can make this product for Walmart and Walmart will buy it. So they were themselves going into this entrepreneurial space. I don't know if it was a characteristic of that particular community or if it was these kids, but we gave them opportunities to even envision a life where they could go finish high school and start companies or any of those things. That was not the goal of the project, but that's where it went. So the point I'm trying to make it is that if we organize our societal structures in the way which allows people of color to privilege themselves. So we don't want for others to privilege Black and brown people. We want Black and brown people to privilege themselves. And for that, the societal structures have to shift.
Right.
So from a workforce thing, based on the research, I can only talk about the data, and yay to Helen on the call. So her research study tells us that when these women went to, and they went through the quote unquote the pipeline, they finished high school, they finished college, they were in these high stakes, physics and stuff like that. And they went to workplace, and the culture of the workplace was such that they basically left their jobs. And the culture of the workplace was you have to dress a certain way because you're a woman. You only get to meet with certain clients because you are of a certain ethnicity, and that would be a good good match for you, and stuff like that. So if we continue to have these parameters and have these structural ways of operating, whether in K-12 or universities, I can talk about universities or at workplace, it is going to be a pipeline issue, because you're not looking at the right place and you're not looking for the strengths that people bring, and it's always a mismatch. So that's what research tells us.
Yeah. Very good. I'm loving this conversation, but I'm also looking at the clock and seeing that we're 10 minutes before Q&A. So this is for the audience to begin formulating your questions, typing them into the chat room. And Lyria, our wonderful behind the scenes person, will begin to feed those questions to me. And we'll only have about 10 minutes of Q&A. So start preparing those. So, we've talked about a lot of hot button issues tonight. It's tonight where I live in Hilton Head, South Carolina. Sun's going down, but it is time for us to talk about what can we do? Is it a pipeline issue? Is it not? The bottom line is that people are not being hired into these jobs who can do these jobs. What are we teaching our children? Whether we call them these kinds of skills or that kinds of skills, what is it that we can be doing? What is it that our audience can take away today and go and do? And that's, I think, it's going to be the mark of that we do our jobs this afternoon. So who'd like to jump in there and start with, from your perspective, what insights can you give this audience that we may not have touched on before, and what actionable things can they go do?
I can start. The one controversial, not that I ever not say controversial, but the one controversial thing that I say on stage when I do presentations is, and it's surprising to people, is that education is not broken.
Hmm.
And people look at you the way everyone's looking at me right now, because if you actually analyze education, graduation rates are higher than ever been. Content that we teach is stronger than it's ever been. We have more schools located in neighborhoods and communities that were never served before. Education is doing exactly what it was designed to do and doing it really, really well. The problem isn't education. The problem is that the world has changed. And by the way, did it serve everyone? No, but that's not the same conversation as the entire thing being broken.
Mhm.
What the difference is that the world has dramatically changed since 1995. 1% of the world was online in 1995. Today, that number is only 50%. And that number is soft. I've been to a lot of these countries that say they have internet access. They don't have internet access. It's probably closer to 35%. We're at the very beginning of this, but the world has dramatically shifted since 1995. And what we need to do isn't fix education or transform education. What we need to do is exactly what the forefathers of education did in the late 1800s when they built a system that served that economy and that culture and that world really well. It created a boom in the economy when we created a factory model basic education system. What we need to do is the same thing now. So this isn't me going into educators and saying everything that you do sucks and you're terrible at it. This is me going into educators and saying, this is a calling. This is what we need to do in education is do what our forefathers did. Build the right system for the future that we face. And so what that means is understanding what that future looks like, understanding that we are entering this digital age, understanding that we are at the very beginning of this, understanding the problems that we face as a world. Don't get me started on the problem with the environmental movement about save the planet, right? The planet's fine. 5 million years from now, 4 billion years from now, the planet's gonna be fine. It's our asses that are in trouble, but that's a different meeting. The idea that what we need to do is create a system, take the best ideas that we have in education. We know, look at all the research. We know what good learning looks like. We know how to do good learning. We know what subjects should be mixed with what subjects and how to do cross-disciplinary actions. We know how to do inquiry-based learning. We know what the issues are. Now, this is a question of will. Are we willing to create a system that supports our students for the future that they face? And we just need to pick. We need to choose. Do we want to or do we not want to? And just live with the consequences of each one of those calls. But that's where we are today, isn't to go fix education or repair education. It's to understand that the future that we face is different. And what we need to do is create a system that supports our students in that future and then have a will to go build it.
Well said.
Can I
Karen?
go? Yes, I can go. So again, speaking to those of you as corporate leaders, I would say the one thing I want to leave you with is make sure diversity, equity, and inclusion is baked into the DNA of your company. Literally, the most important qualities you need is to be brave and to be vulnerable and be willing to fail. I get that this is daunting, and a lot of times when you don't know where to start, it's very tempting to look elsewhere and see what others are doing and copy and kind of hope for the best. But this is a really big trend that I'm seeing that really scares me, because what that does when you're copying programs or initiatives without deeply understanding the why, that comes across as really performative. It comes across as you're doing it for optics, like you're putting out a statement, for example, or you're putting pictures of photos of your employees of color on your careers page. It comes across as a checkbox, and ultimately that does a lot of damage in the long run. So, there's a lot of things you can do that feel a little bit more genuine, to start investing in things like psychological safety within your company, or unconscious bias awareness training, so that folks have the same language to speak to each other with on occasions where those biases tend to flare up quite a bit, like in interviews, for instance. Establish rituals that feel really, really unique and sustainable to your company. But above all, just get started. I see a lot of folks fall into the trap where they think it's an initiative or a program, which are not the right words to use here, that have to be fully baked and launched upon the company. And that's just not the right way to think about it. Perfection literally does not exist. So you just kind of have to get started and go for connection. And that's how you can pave the way.
Great, Karen. And there's lots of folks and resources out there who can help. Yeah, that's great.
I have so much to say. I don't know where to start.
You got 2 minutes. How about that?
So in terms of what people can walk away, so there's this whole notion of public schooling, public money for public, right? And then privatization and charter, and there's a whole politics of it, which I don't have time to get into that, right? And so there are implications, and I can share studies from outside of US and India where education has been privatized, and it's devastating for poor people because they can't afford to send, and they're called like budget schools, and you get budget education literally. So those of you listening here, I would really help us to think about private versus public. Having said that, in terms of coming back to Jamie's point, like, do we know how to do inquiry? Actually, we don't. Honestly, we don't. And we know how to do inquiry-based learning for kids who are in high-resource schools. You go to a high school lab in a well-funded school, and you go to a high school lab in Denver in a low income, and you would not believe that these are the same schools. So it is not true that the experiences those kids are having that are in high resource are not the experience the kids in low income are having. So, and we continue to do the cookbook lab. I used to live in Atlanta, I worked there, and low income kids, they had pacing charts, pacing guides where teachers had to be on the same page of the textbook same day. They had no flexibility to do anything creative for their kids. So basically, the system we've designed, the schooling system we've designed, is doing exactly what's supposed to do. It's recreating and repositioning itself to keep some people down, and it's harsh language, and support other people. Because when schools were started back in the day, they were started to serve the middle class people, where the father went to work and mother stayed at home. So if we had parent-teachers conferences in the middle of the day, the mother could go. But when you have two working class parents, how can they go to a parent-teachers conference in the middle of the day? So this whole notion of schooling serving everybody, I respectfully disagree with Jamie on that one. Having said that, I would say we need to re-envision schools considering what's coming next. So I don't know if we totally blow it up and start from scratch, or we do this incremental thing. That's a conversation to have. But coming back to what people can take, I think one of the things we can think about is public-private partnership. So for example, what Wendy is doing, she is a nonprofit and she's doing this great, hands-on, minds-on learning. I have grants that I could use because NSF gives me money, but I'm limited in certain ways, right? So one of the things we really miss out when we do grants is having role models for our kids, having guest speakers for our kids who look like our kids. And it's so hard to recruit those people from the industry, because when kids see people like themselves working in the industry, I think it's very encouraging for them. It's very motivating. So I think this public-private partnership, whether it relates to resources, human resources, material resources, I think we need to think about that moving forward, because I think that is something we can present to the kids who have probably never even had a conversation with anyone from the industry, who doesn't even know what a job in any of these high-tech companies look like, right? Now, I'm not saying they need to go and get a job, but at least having options. And I think it's the same idea about kids with certain kinds of poverty, whether it's starting business or whether it's going, into job, whichever pathway you take, they are at a disadvantage. And we need to take specific steps to kind of bridge that gap so these kids can come, like your conversation about equality and equity. So they also get the same level playing field compared to other kids that have a lot of resources at school, at home, their parents, taking them to museums, doing summer school, after school STEM camps, and all of those things. So like I said, I had a lot of things to say, so I'm going to stop here.
Thank you so much, Geeta. Woo! I don't know about your audience, but I think we could continue this conversation for another hour. Oh, we will in the breakout sessions. So Geeta, you'll have more time to say those things that we don't have time for now. I am looking in the chat to see whether or not we have some questions in there. And we do have a question. We do have a couple of questions. But first, I want to thank Geeta, Jamie, and Karen for their brilliant insights this evening. Very well done. Says, let's see, question. Administrator, this is from Rebecca Ranking. to everyone. So anyone can jump in here and answer. Administrator and STEM instructional coach from a middle school in Pueblo, Colorado. That's what she is. What data should we track and make visible to students, families, the communities, et cetera, to foster the development of those innovative human skills to disrupt cycles of poverty? What data should we track? Who wants that?
Well, I'll start because I get this question all the time, right? Which is just because it's hard to measure doesn't mean that it's impossible. And just because you're lazy, not the person asking, but you, the general you, doesn't mean that you get to measure whatever you want, right? This idea that we can't measure problem solving is insane. This idea that you can't measure collaboration is insane. There are lots of ways to measure these things, and just because it's hard doesn't mean you don't do it. And the same thing with, when we talk to parents, right? Like parents like, yeah, no, I want my education system to change. And then you say, well, we're going to get rid of grades. What? Grades? No, how am I going to know when my kid got a B? Like, and my response always to parents is like, what grade did you get at work last year? Right? Oh, you were measured on your collaboration abilities. You were measured on your problem solving skills. You were measured on you did an assessment based on, you know what? We should try that here, right? So there is ways to communicate these messages that parents, because parents all went to third grade, they're all experts in education. And so they want the same experience they want their kids to have the same experience that they had, except for the hitting the kid on the knuckles with the ruler. They don't want that part. But the important part here, the important thing to take away from this is that everything is measurable. There's nothing that's not measurable. And just because it's hard to measure doesn't mean that we don't do it. And there's a lot of organizations out there, and I actually advise a couple, if you want to know more, hit me up on Twitter, that actually have programs that measure problem solving skills and collaboration skills and communication skills, or whatever it is that you want to measure, just like we measure those things in the corporate world.
Awesome. Thank you, Jamie. I'm going to go to the next question just so we can get a few in and ask Karen and Geeta. Karen, I'm going to give this one to you because there's one specifically for Geeta after that. What advice from Robert Grover do you have for a new startup? Karen, I know you spend a lot of times in startups. How do we intentionally plan for a culture of equity without it being awkward and clumsy in the early stages? For example, going from 2 employees to 10.
Oh my gosh, how exciting. Congrats, Robert, first of all. And thank you for asking the question. This is exactly the right time to start. If you're a startup and you're scaling from 2 to 10, there's literally no better time to start. And I applaud you for being here and for just being part of that conversation. That's the most important thing you can do. And I would say, embrace the awkward and clumsy. It's going to be that way. I'll reiterate what I said earlier. Literally, the only thing you need is to be brave and vulnerable and say, hey, we're going to start talking about this. And it's going to be awkward. It's going to be clumsy. We're going to fall down. There are going to be missteps, which we will talk about and grow together. And that's the most important thing you can do to kind of set the tone for the culture of your company. Please, please don't steal away and try to plan something without your employees for them in silence, because in the meantime, they will think nothing is happening and that this is something you don't care about. Nobody expects perfection. We are literally all figuring this out in real time together. A few years ago, when I invented the Chief Diversity Officer role I was serving in, I was calling it Chief Diversity Officer because that's what everybody called it. And then everyone was like, actually, diversity is not the right thing to focus on. It should be inclusion. And then it became D&I. And then suddenly the E came in for equity. And now we're talking about B for belonging, a J for justice. Like the acronym keeps growing. And I think that's really a reflection of how this is a conversation that's moving in real time, that we all can keep up with, but also understand that it's not perfect. None of us are perfect. We're all going to fall down. And so embrace the awkward and clumsy, and your employees will thank you so much for it. And it will become the kind of place that they are so loyal to. Yeah. And if you want, kind of practical advice on kind of programs to stand up and trainings to do and employee experiences to audit or recruiting, I'm happy to talk to you about that offline.
Awesome. Karen, that was amazing. Thank you so much. And you're right. Right at the beginning of a startup is when you want to work on culture. It's so much harder later. So congratulations, Robert. Let's get that done. And it will always feel like imperfect, right? Because it's going to keep changing. So embrace it. For Geeta, how do we break a cycle of cookbook science education nationally? And what techniques and experiences have you seen be successful that could be implemented as an enforceable policy?
Oh, boy.
Lots in there.
Uh,
And we have not so much time left.
Yeah. So, in science, we had the new standards come out, the NGSS, because before we were calling it STEM, but we basically were doing science and math. We were not doing engineering part, and the NGSS standards kind of are inclusive of that. So there are a lot of organizations and some of my colleagues who are developing resources to align teaching with NGSS. And Colorado now has started to, so Colorado, their new standard came out in 2010, the CAS, Colorado Academic Standards. And now they've rolled out the new version of it with the NGSS in it. And so these standards are not very old. And I think there's still a lot of effort being put by the science education community to put resources together so we can exactly do what the question really asks. But one of the things I tell my students when I teach these courses saying, take risks as a teacher. And don't think that you as a science person, you were probably a science geek and you loved science. So no matter how you were taught, you loved it. But all your students, they're not interested in science that way. So if you really want to get interested, think about yourself in a topic that you're not interested. How would you like to be taught? So think putting your students in those shoes and then kind of taking a step back and thinking about, can I do coupled inquiry? Can I do open inquiry? I mean, there are strategies that can be taught. I'll be happy to chat with this person individually if they want to.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Geeta. And thank you, Jamie and Karen as well. You all were amazing. I'm going to transition it back to Bill, but before I do, Lyria is going to pop up our post-panel poll questions. And I think there's more than one this time, and would ask you all to, again, participate fully in the polls. This has been an incredible delight for me to moderate this panel. I just want to continue talking all night to these three. Encourage you to jump into your breakout sessions when the time comes. But here is the first question. Let's begin answering that, and then Lyria will bring up questions 2 and 3. And Bill, the transition hands off to you now. And thank you all for having me.
Thank you, Avis. A wonderful job as always. I want to thank our wonderful panel for their insights and how each of us can be part of the equity solution for students. How we can go beyond our community to support the schools with high needs. I want you to think about this. What can we do as individually, as an organization? Think deeply about that as you leave this, or as you go into your panel sessions. As our panelists said, all of our students are equally talented, but it's critical that we help create opportunities for them to be successful. I want to encourage each of you to continue this conversation, both at work and at home. Your support and your passion for helping young students will drive their success in STEM. Winnie will now wrap us up and help lead us into the breakout room portion of the event today. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Bill, and thank you, panelists. That was just absolutely outstanding. You guys just simply nailed it. You really come from totally different areas within your careers, and I think you really did a great job laying out the problem as it is and giving some solutions. So I'd like to just take a moment before we jump into the breakout rooms. I'd just like to take a moment to share a little bit about my experience around both the problem and the solution, which really generated the whole programming around STEM generation. So again, I'm a mother, and I was a research professor, and so I have a STEM education STEM background. And after basically created a whole thesis out of my kids' science and engineering fair, the facilitation of their fair. I had a teacher from a nearby school ask if I would help reproduce that at her school. And this was a Title I school, so high needs, low resource school. Now, the very first time I met with this teacher, the gap in resources and opportunity between these two public schools was obvious. The Title I school didn't have the smart boards, a STEM lab, nor all the extracurricular activities that children from my kids' schools had right at their fingertips. Both are public schools. Both schools are filled with the same talent pool and same potential. But the kids at my kids' school had so much more opportunities to engage in learning outside of school too. So those learning opportunities are socioeconomic privilege. Our children are simply not on a level playing field. So 2 weeks after this Title I school's highly successful science and engineering fair, the teacher I had supported reached out to me to share a story. She had explained that her most at-risk student had come to her the morning after the fair to share that he had decided he was going to be an engineer when he grew up. He had totally changed his behavior in class. He was focused, he was dedicated. He had found something that he really, really connected with that he didn't know was there. His experience with a science and engineering fair project simply changed his life. He knew he could be part of the tech pipeline, which until that point had been totally out of reach. So this experience also changed my life. And I fully experienced both the problem and solution from every angle as a scientist, mother, and educator. But this experience was an aha moment for me. So I ditched my career in higher education to start STEM Generation. So all of our programming is built on kids developing their leadership skills, their 21st century skills, whatever you want to call it. And we do assess students based on metrics of achieving those skills. We also, all the programming it's all hands-on. It's all very simple based on things that kids have already touched and felt in their everyday lives. So I just want to share my screen before we go into the breakout rooms and give a big shout out to everybody who's been involved, and then give you an opportunity to have a more intimate conversation with each of the panelists or myself. So I am going to very quickly share my screen here. So again, I want to thank the panelists for all being here today. I want to just share, we're at this point where we're transitioning into a small group discussions that you can participate in. And so that basically brings us at around 4:15, we're a little bit over. So let me get situated here. So I'm not going to, I was going to include the panel, the poll results, but I just didn't have quite enough time to include that. So I want to thank our community event leaders, the Carter Family Foundation and HW and Associates, and also the 12 equity teams who are all here today and are supporting us as well, and to our program sponsors, which are separate from our event sponsors. So thank you very much. I also want to thank our event committee, especially Carol Weber, who was the event chairperson, and also all of our event ambassadors. Without your support and all coming together behind this event, it wouldn't be the success that it was. So thank you all. Thank you, Lyria, as well, who's on the back end of running the whole Zoom. I just want to come back to the mission of STEM Generation. Our research, our programming or incapable in STEM, while elementary school teachers need the greatest support. And then also students by 6th grade will have had 6,000 fewer hours of learning for students who live in poverty versus their peers. So the third body of research is really all around when students have a support structure around science fair, it is a point of inspiration to explore science beyond the classroom. So, so I just have this the second of 2 slides about STEM generation. So we have 3 different components of our programming. The first is we engage teachers in professional development and give each of their students a series of 3 STEM project kits so that all students, regardless of the support structure at home, get the same level of support. Then we engage them in a science and engineering fair that will be virtual this year. And then we engaged diverse STEM professionals with students as role models, which is a really critical during this age group. This role modeling helps students to develop their identities so they can know, hey, I could be an engineer like her or like him. So it's very important at this age. So at the onset of remote learning, we pivoted really hard right alongside our teachers and built out the remote learning capability of the programming. And that success of that program and our programming altogether really has won us the support of Denver Public Schools. So, and we've been invited back to participate in their Professional Development Day. So I'd like to invite you all to take your commitment to the next level and join STEM Generation and our community and engage in our programming. If you have any questions about our programming, then you are welcome to stay in this main Zoom session. In this main Zoom session, I will remain in this main Zoom session. And then those of you who will be joining the breakout rooms can be brought into those separate small groups. So I do want to give you the opportunity. We did have a last minute opportunity come to us this week that we very quickly added into today's program. I want to give you the opportunity to double your impact today. So I want to invite you to join STEM Generation in our programming. And today we have a sponsor, HW & Associates, who have offered a matching gift of $3,000 if we can raise $3,000 today. So you can do that too in one of 2 ways. You can go to stemgeneration.org/donate, or you can text to donate, and that just in the to field, you enter 50155 and the message STEM Gen, and then you can take it from there. So if we can raise $6,000 today, cumulatively through the matching gift and your gift, then that will help us support 6 teachers this academic year and serve 180 students. So I'm hoping that you, if you have the ability to join us in this, that would be wonderful. I'm going to actually close this presentation and share a screen that shows our progress with that. And then we'll start into the breakout rooms. So here we go. Wow. So we are already, we are 22% there already. So all it takes is, so what is that? Maybe 50 of you at, sorry. So that at $50 each, that's like 60 donations. So please take this opportunity to support our programming. So I will now move into the breakout room of the program. So, so any of you who'd like to stay in this session with myself and one of the teachers who I believe is also on the line, we will lead discussion around our programming, answer any questions you have about our programming. And so for those of you who donated $100 or more, are an equity team member or a K-12 educator or STEM Generations team member, you're welcome to join the breakout rooms. So if you're going to remain in the Zoom room, you might want to take a quick 5-minute break if you'd like and join us in 5 minutes. So you have the option to join one of the breakout rooms. So the way that's going to look is I'm going to show you very quickly how to raise your hand, and I will call out each of the leaders' names, and if you raise your hand, then you can then we'll make sure that you get shifted into their breakout room. All right. So it's great to see. We still have folks in the room here. I'm not quite sure. So it looks like we have 8 of us total. I would like to invite you all to turn to unmute yourselves if you can. Lyra, I don't know if you have a way of doing that. All right. So I'm so glad to have you all in the room here, and would love to answer any questions you have about STEM generation or our programming. Not quite sure if Amy Sukup. So Amy is in here. She's a teacher who we worked with last academic year and is going to implement the programming this academic year as well. So you can ask any questions of myself if you have specific questions about implementation. Either of us can chime in at that point. But Amy, it's great to have you on, and please chime in as you would like. So so let's go ahead and get started. Does anybody have any questions? I can share with you a little bit more about our programming. Just let me know how you would like to run it. It's great to meet you all. So I guess what we could do is if you have the ability to unmute yourselves, then how about we just start by each of you introducing who you are and what has brought you here today. And we can just start. I have a visual of folks here. It looks like Amy would be the next after Lyria, if I'm looking at my top panel. So Amy, I'll let you start, and then we'll follow with Jonathan and Denton and Victoria, Casey, and Kayla. So yeah, I'll let you take it from here, Amy, just to introduce yourself, and thanks for being here.
Hi, everyone. Just before I introduce myself, it looks like Jonathan did put into the chat that he's in the wrong room. So I wonder if we could get him placed into the right room.
Sorry.
It's okay.
Where do you want to go, Jonathan?
I was every chance I get to be closer to Obama, that's what I choose. So
He's not on the call today.
I wanted to be with Avis is as close as I could get. I need a little positivity, man. Listen, I hope to connect with you ladies again soon, but I just need a little sunshine in my life. I'm sorry.
All right, let me see if I can make this happen for you, Jonathan.
Thank you.
No worries.
So while that's going on, I can introduce myself. So I am a 5th grade math and science teacher at a dual language school here in Northwest Denver. I have been teaching for 8 years total. I do have my master's degree from SUNY Buffalo, and I've been at my current school for 5 years. It is a Title I school, so all of those kind of big themes and topics that were being discussed, I live every day in my career path. So it was really great to just be a part of this discussion, and really humbling to just see how many community members are out there and want to support. And oftentimes that connection is just not there. That's it.
All right, thank you, Amy. So again, you can ask any questions of Amy or myself. So we'll move on to Victoria. Victoria, do you want to introduce yourself and share what brings you here today?
Yes, thank you. Victoria Battison. I'm living just outside of San Jose, California, and it is a gorgeous, beautiful blue sky, clean air today. I was responsible for philanthropy and participated in the CSR program at Poly, formerly known as Plantronics and Polycom, until my job ended. They had to cut back and my job ended at the end of May. So I had met Wendy earlier this year, and she invited me to participate in this, and I'm really glad I did. It was really interesting. I have a soft spot in my heart and I'm very passionate about STEM education. I have daughters who are adults, but I also have a granddaughter. And I think it's a really critical area that needs addressing for females and basically a lot of different groups that are not being represented, and we really need to improve the STEM education, and we have to get to the children, reach them at a very young age in order to make changes happen. Because I think that the diversity of employees in all companies will only make those companies' products or services better for the whole world. And I think that, it really concerns me that those changes have taken so long. So any opportunity I have to increase my knowledge and my ability to help affect those changes is something that I take very seriously. And I'm really glad to have this opportunity to participate today. So thank you.
Great. Thank you, Victoria. It's great to see you again. So
Thank you. Nice to see you, Wendy.
Yeah. Thank you for that and your passion for being part of all of this. So thank you very much. So how about we move to Kayla? Kayla, would you like to introduce yourself and what's brought you here today?
Yeah, so I'm Kayla. I am the Associate Director of the Denver Science Fair. And so we are working on building in a lot of our programs that we've been, had in the back of our mind for equity and diversity and inclusion for a really long time. And we're kind of at a social moment where you can't ignore that anymore. And especially since we're going online for this year's fair, it's a perfect time to redirect our resources towards kind of building programs that in the long run are going to be able to help us support that within the fair, because they're notoriously bad about supporting schools that already have support. So hoping to break that a little bit.
All right, thank you. Yeah, so creating that equity within the, so for many of you who aren't aware, there's a whole international science and engineering fair system that Kayla mentioned. And so there's this whole progression from local schools to regional fairs, which she's part of the regional fair, then state fair and international science and engineering fair. And there's, and during those fairs, that's where you really start to see this imbalance in support given to the kids. And science fair is so powerful and is so known to really inspire kids. So it's really important to create that support structure for all of the kids so that they can enter something like this science fair system. At the International Science and Engineering Fair, the kids compete for up to $5 million a year annually. And that doesn't include all the opportunities that come out through their participation. So we want to get more kids into your regional fair, and that's part of our goal. So thanks for being here. That's awesome. So, all right, so let's move on to Denton. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Denton Taylor. I taught at a Title I school for 7 years and currently making a transition into something else. I don't know exactly what that's going to be yet. But I had the privilege of hearing Wendy speak at Denver Startup Week, and she sent me a message about coming here, and it's been just great to hear all the things that are going through. And there's so much in there that I hear that I'm like, we need to really be pushing this. The idea of non-cookbook science is huge. And I think of my students and just going through, and we never did a science fair. I taught at a great charter school, and we had access to materials, but we didn't have that. I don't think my students would have access to what they needed at their homes. And I don't think that my budget would be big enough to give them all that they need. So along for the journey, I should say.
Yeah, absolutely. And so thanks for sharing that. You bring up another really good point. All of different kids have different support structures at home, and that is part of what we're we're trying to do. We give the supplies to the kids. Each kiddo gets their own kit of supplies needed to complete the 3-lesson series that builds out those skills. So, so this is definitely something that is ingrained in part of our programming. And thanks for the work you've done through the educational system. So it's very admirable. It's definitely a tough time right now as well. So, all right, thanks for being here. Appreciate it. All right, so Casey, whoops, I didn't mean to skip over you if I did. Casey, if you're still there, if you'd like to join in and introduce yourself, that would be wonderful. You're currently muted, just so you know. So you're still muted. If you go to the lower left-hand corner of your screen, you should be able to unmute yourself by just selecting the microphone. If you're not there, then that's perfectly fine. We'll just keep the discussion moving forward. So looks like she's maybe not here at the moment. So yeah, I would love to open up the floor to any sort of discussion that you have, any questions that you might have. How can we collectively together be part of really making a difference through whether it's your programming or other people's programming, or what are things that we can give to you to walk away with. So just would like to put that out there to you. Are there any questions of myself or topics of discussion that you would like to join in on? So if not, I can give you a quick introduction that goes a little bit more into detail about our programming. Does that sound good? Good. Do you? I would love, though, to give you the floor. I get to be in the spotlight plenty, so I would love to give you the floor to share yourselves with everybody else in a way that you think would be good. What's on your mind? What would you like to share?
Can I talk?
Yeah, absolutely. So just as you probably noticed, this is Lyria. She is our techie brains behind the whole Zoom. So please come and join in.
Thank you, Wendy. And I'm no longer in corporate America, but I have a career of over 20 years in IT. I retired from executive leadership about 5 years ago. So, the language, I understand. Victoria, you had mentioned your granddaughters, I think, and getting them involved in STEM. And I have 2 granddaughters and 1 grandson. And it's funny that the girls navigate to their devices. They're in their devices all the time. And my grandson, he's more of the, let me figure out how things work, where the girls, how can I say this? The girls are more consumers. My grandchildren anyway, the girls are more consumers of technology, when my grandson seems to be, how do I make it work? Do you, Wendy, Victoria, anyone, are there any, is this common?
My granddaughter, I have a granddaughter, she's only 4, and I have a grandson who's 4 and his brother is 6. So they're 1 daughter and 2 sons from the 2 different daughters I have. And I think part of it is genetics, because one grandson is very much into building things. He loves his Legos. He can play with those for 12 hours a day. The other one, not so much. He's more physical. My granddaughter is still not into anything like that. We're trying to get her into the Legos and the little sets. She's still too young for anything other. So far the kind of construction sets we have found, or she's a little bit too young still. So we're starting with the Legos, and she is starting to get into those, but she is really a girly girl, no doubt about it. But when she was born, my daughter was just, she was already looking into private schools for when she's old enough to get into, to be in schools that would really promote the STEM programs. And so we became, really extra concerned about it. And that's kind of a long answer, but I can't say, just because I don't have enough personal experience, but I think that I think part of it is genetics, and I think part of it is what they're around. Yeah, I don't know. Anybody else?
How about the teachers? Or go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay, my initial thought on that is that's very, very much a performative gender thing that's influenced by their environment and what they're taught about scientific identity. And I know a lot, like one thing that was brought up earlier is like teaching to be a scientist versus like that scientific literacy piece. And I think that the way that they engage with that is environmentally dependent. So like personally, I went to a STEM charter school, and if anything, I think among peers, I saw female students being the ones who wanted to question the existing ways that we were going about doing these things. So I don't necessarily think that like by nature, that's a real association.
I would agree with that. And then I'd also say that a lot of, that I saw a lot of the girls that I taught would kind of be more into several of the things. But I think the biggest thing that comes into play that I noticed is kind of who gets encouraged to keep doing it. And what's around them that's going through, and who is into like the little different pieces that come up. Like our robotics club that we had at our school was very male heavy. And a lot of the boys signed up for it. I also think that when you look at some of the things that are being sold and that are out there, they are still a lot of things that are targeted to, like on the kids, that are targeted to boys. Just with the way that they do the branding. And I think that's a spot that kind of has room to change and has different spots to go through. But from the teaching perspective, the other thing that I noticed that's challenging is when you're doing research and you're going through, I think it's important to show scientists that are of all races, that are male and female, and it's hard. It is real hard to do, and there's ways in which a lot of science that has been promoted has been white male science. And it's been taken through, and finding people that, or just finding scientists that look like my students was a challenge. And it was something that I tried to bring into the classroom. But I think it's another barrier to entry, is if you don't see someone that looks like you, you get, especially in middle school, you're like, well, I don't know if it's possible. I remember having a conversation with a kid about college that, and he told me, he's like, I didn't know Mexicans could go to college, was his exact words. And it's like, until we showed him the students that from our high school that were going to college and that were accepted. So I think that there's a lot that needs to be seen and that we need to be showing, and we need to be making sure that examples are there of all types of people being successful.
Yeah. Absolutely. There was somebody who posted on LinkedIn, I think it was Monday of this week, and she's a scientist, and she was young, like maybe in her 30s, and I don't know what race she was, but she definitely wasn't white, and she looked like somebody you'd see in a nightclub or a punk rock nightclub or something. I mean, she definitely did not fit the mold of what people think of as a scientist. And it was so great that she was pointing this out. And you're absolutely right, Denton. We absolutely have to show that everybody can do everything and anything. And here I'm pure as white and can be, but it's harder, I think, for me to get that message out. But and it feels weird getting that message out because I think, people, do you know what I'm trying to say without explaining myself? But I absolutely do. And my daughter, who has the daughter, she was a brainiac. I mean, she was pre-med at UCLA as a high school junior. She went into their program, and she was one of very few girls in any of her high school classes. But she struggled, and it was a challenge for her, and she doesn't want her daughter to have to go through that herself, even as a white female. But it's even worse for everybody else. And we need not only people of different races or religions, but also people who have different physical challenges. And like I said before, everybody of any kind of a background has a lot to offer to any company, any business, any service. And we need to enrich everybody's, all these companies' products and services by having many more unique kinds of inputs. Yeah, and we need to start really young.
And I think as a teacher, one of the challenges is finding people to have our students look up to.
Mm-hmm.
And then also like when you're crammed and you're putting together a presentation, I mean, if you go to Google and you search for an image, it is whitewashed.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, I just, while you were talking, went and searched hands, and it takes 20 pictures before you find someone whose hands aren't white.
Yeah.
So when you're going through and you're trying to figure out ways to support your visual learners, there's things there that take an extra couple of minutes, but those minutes add up, and that's challenging from a teacher's perspective. Especially challenging as that's what you should be doing, but you're like, it's 9:45 at night. I just need to be done. What do I need to put in there to make it into that space?
I have a question.
On Victoria, just
Sure.
one moment. Wendy, I did give all the breakout rooms a few extra minutes just because it took a little while to get going on the breakout.
Sure. That's totally fine.
Okay.
Yeah. So Victoria, did you have a question?
I do. We have 2 teachers here, or 3 who are in the panel. 1, 2. Okay. So I'm Monday. Okay. I've wondered, because starting in 3rd grade, in 3rd grade, the girls are on par with the boys in the classes. And then in middle school, they start to slide down. And I don't know for sure, but perhaps that's for non-white students also. Do you think that the teachers are starting to, I wonder how much of that is because teachers are unconsciously not reaching out and encouraging those non-traditional students or the non-white boys or whatever. Is it an unconscious effort that's happening, do you think, or do you think that's changing?
From what I noticed, I actually have the other results that kind of come into play in my classrooms. A majority of my girls outperform the boys that I taught, kind of across the board. But
what grade is that?
7th grade.
Okay.
But I don't know statistically what's normal and what's behind. I think that it's, but I do think that that bias is there. And I think that it's kind of ingrained. And it's one thing that our school worked a lot on, is trying to make sure that we see the biases that we have and try to do things to change them. So I can only speak from my experience on that.
Does anybody, go ahead.
I can just piggyback off of what Denton was saying as well. I teach 5th grade. I'm at a dual language school, so I think about like 95% of my students identify as Hispanic, Title I, etc. And I would say it really just depends on a multitude of factors. I wouldn't say it's necessarily boys versus girls. I think it's a lot of background in terms of their home life, in terms of, you know, what parent status and what their level with education is. We get families who are new to the country, new, kind of had sparse schooling in Mexico, and like those kids, you know, like they can still perform and do well. It just really depends on the student, the personality, and the interest level. And I think I've equate myself to being a stand-up comedian for about 8 hours a day, just trying to keep kids engaged and excited and wanting to learn the content, because if they're not interested, you know, and it's hard to keep fifth graders interested in academic fields, but that is, I think, the huge hump to get over. And I think that's where I really kind of latched onto Wendy when I heard about her curriculum. Is it's fun activities where kids get to, you know, play with bouncy balls, but they don't realize that playing is learning, and kind of all of those themes that were going on with the panelists of how do we get kids excited and engaged and want to be those lifelong learners. So I think it's less about the content or the gender, and it's more about their interest, their excitement, and their background.
I agree.
Thank you for being teachers.
Yeah, this
All of you teachers.
Absolutely. Yeah, so are there any other questions? So, you know, through STEM Generation, so I had the privilege of working with Amy last academic year through the remote learning, onset of remote learning, and she did an amazing job. And one thing that I just still, that keeps me going on this trajectory is, you know, hearing stories about the kids and their excitement around doing science, right? Especially hands-on science, something that they get to do that's related to something in their everyday lives, right? And exploring that science behind their toys, right? And developing that process on their own and leading their learning, all of these things, you know, it really, seeing the students and the teachers engaging with them, it's just so fun and inspiring to see the teachers put the program to good use. It's awesome. So thank you.
And Wendy, I've brought everyone back, those who decided to hang on for a little bit longer. All the rooms are closed, and those who stayed on are back in this main session.
All right, well, fantastic. I welcome all of you who came back into the room. So I hope that you had I have no doubt that you had very insightful and spirited conversations with our panelists, and I hope you got to dive deeper into the topics that you are most passionate about. So I'd like to open the floor to any questions you have of myself. So again, I'm the founder and executive director of STEM Generation, and the whole STEM Generation team and the panelists are really standing behind this program today, and I appreciate you all being here. So are there any questions that you have about STEM Generation or our programming, or anything that you would like to share that you learned in your breakout room that you'd like to bring here? So are there any highlights by the breakout rooms? Or I guess we can start with Victoria, since you did raise your hand. If you have a question, we'll start there, and then we'll go through and ask for other engagement.
Thank you. Quick question. The donation matching, how long will that continue for?
So we will continue through that through tomorrow. We are at 1,700. So we're 50%, 57% of the way there. I'll follow up with an email to all. We had about, it looks like about 60% of registrants, actually, no, so it was probably a little closer to 70% of registrants actually participated. I knew a number of those folks were unavailable, but they registered because they wanted to view the this recording. So that being said, we'll continue to run that with a follow-up to try to get to our $3,000 mark. So thank you all for participating in that. We're doing great. So this was a totally spur of the moment thing. So I'm happy that that we were able to pull it off. So any other questions? How about, are there any folks from the other room that want to share maybe a aha moment or highlight from their room that you'd like to share with everybody else? How about Bill? What did you, Bill, or so I just see Bill.
Karen
Go
had
ahead.
to leave, but Bill
Okay.
and Karen in our room were just awesome playing off of each other. And if Bill is still here, I'd love to get him to jump in.
Yeah, I thought first off, like I said, I think it was great having Karen and I in the same room.
Yeah.
Like she said, I learned so much from Karen with the things she brought up. And we talked about, what some of the things she brought up was how we have to be careful on how we write job postings. So we're making sure that we're being inclusive of our women population. A lot of us have heard the studies that women require, almost 80-90% to before they will even apply for a job. And we can fix that. We talked a little bit about, the pipeline concerns and the fact that it's really internal. It's what our managers do. It's that drives it. And psychological safety is critical. If somebody doesn't feel psychologically safe, they're not going to stay in your organization. So we talked a little bit about that, and we had a wonderful conversation. I'm going to have to continue on with someone else who was really tiring equity and energy, because NREL is an energy organization, equity and energy, and also what we can do to be better. Not better, but what we can do to tie those hand in hand together. I gave him some examples of things we're doing at NREL, and then he gave me some very technical stuff that I'm gonna have to link him up with our engineers for some of the conversations.
All right.
Yeah. But I think the key point, circle back. I'm sorry, Wendy, was it's critical that we work with the K through 12. The things you're doing are just they're just right on the money. If we don't change the demographics there, change what we're seeing here, we're not going to be able to do the things we need to do in the future. If we look at the fast growth of the Latino population we're just not going to be able to do what we need to do. And it's critical that we take time, both as an organization and individuals, to support organizations like yours and other activities like that. I think Tom Mason, our community outreach person, was on the phone, and he and I were talking in the chat saying how much more we have to do to support that.
All right, thank you. Does anybody else have any comments about that? Any questions that you would like to chime in with? Any more insights from or any of you in the other rooms that you would like to share something that you got out of those rooms? So I can share just a little bit about what we were discussing in this room. So there was a lot of discussion around what is it about children's learning that helps them define whether they are a good fit, and are there gender disparities in identities in the early years, and so we talked quite a bit about personal experiences with our own kids. So I have two kids who I have a son and a daughter, and they're both very, I think they both get a lot from a lot of the back and forth that happens in our house. And they definitely, I have tried to do my best to expand my support of kids beyond my kids and going beyond my own immediate community, which is a lot of people, I think, are unaware. They're just simply unaware, because they're in their own communities and they're simply unaware of these disparities in opportunity, that they're just literally right down the road, right? And until we can create that awareness within the business community and just in general, our community, and expand our communities and realize that we are affected and touched by everybody around us, and it's not a us and them, it is just all of us, right? And to go beyond our immediate communities and create that awareness. And hopefully we've sparked a change here through the event to really take home some practical tips that you can use today. So we're at 6:10. So I am plenty available to answer any questions. I totally respect that a number of you folks might have to leave. So I'm happy to stay on and answer any questions that you might have of myself or STEM Generation. Also, if you don't ask here, you can always reach out to me and email me. I would love to meet with you. And yeah, I appreciate the absolute amazing event that this ended up becoming. So thank you all for all you have done to make this successful.